We have great news regarding holdouts. We have some pretty bad injury news. We'll talk about it all here. But first off, the two tiers. These are guys that you start regardless of matchup every week. Tyreek, St. Brown, CMC, Bijan, Brees, Lamb, Jefferson, AJ Brown, Gibbs, Taylor, Barkley, HN, Kyron, Puka, ETN, Pacheco, and Josh Jacobs. Don't really need to talk about any of them. I will mention Gibbs was banged up with a hamstring. Looks like he's good to go week 1. You start him. Yes, Puka is banged up with the knee. Looks like he's good to go week 1. You start him. Let's move on to some more interesting players. Our next tier is going to be led off with Nico Collins. For the love of God, get Nico Collins in your starting lineup. 2 blow-up games against the Colts last season. Plus, if you look at the preseason usage that you had for these receivers in Houston, looks like Nico's going to be on the field for pretty much every single CJ Stroud dropback. So if that's the case, I think it's very easy to just go out there and project him as a mid to low-end wide receiver 1 in a great matchup, which should be a high-scoring game. James Cook, Rashad White will be our next 2 backs. I'm going to go James Cook ahead of White because I think with the Curtis Samuel injury and Keon Coleman being a rookie, this is probably going to be a situation where they lean on James Cook, use him a ton as a receiving back as well in this offense, and what should be a very high-scoring game against the Arizona Cardinals. Rashad White, really safe, projectable volume, right? We know that he's going to have everything as a receiver. We understand that he is going to have a ton of carries in what should be a game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers win. At least they are favored against Washington. Derrick Henry at 21. Derrick Henry, we actually get to see him play on Thursday night. If you look at his underdog pick'em right now, they actually have him at 65.5 rushing yards for his higher or lower and even odds to score a touchdown this week. Now, I will say what's very interesting is Underdog just rolled out something called vulture protection, where if you go through and you take a running back to score a touchdown and they get vultured maybe by the quarterback, maybe by a backup running back, right? You take Tony Pollard to score a touchdown and Tajay Spears scores it instead. This week, actually, Underdog is going to give you back your entry insight credit. So even if your player gets vultured, you're still technically a winner. And of course, if you wanted to check out any of those pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. If you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog, you're going to be getting a Travis Kelce special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for Thursday night's game, plus a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard. Plus, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Highly recommend you take advantage of that with the link in the comment section. We have something very special coming for Underdog users soon. But moving over to our next guy, we'll be looking at Garrett Wilson at 22. With Wilson, he's going to be much higher than this in most rankings lists throughout the season. It is just going to be a very tough matchup going up against the San Francisco 49ers, where the Jets actually are only projected to score about 19.5 points according to sportsbooks. Drake London at 23 is going to be a riser in my rankings, where going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, what's interesting is Kyle Pitts just got placed on the injury report with a hamstring injury. So if all of a sudden you think that Pitts is actually going to be a little bit limited this week against Pittsburgh, you can bump up the projected target share for Drake London and what should be a dramatically improved offense this year. Jamar Chase is my wide receiver 1 in the Flock League. Trust me, I am starting Jamar Chase this week. I do want to depress him a little bit in these rankings just because he has 3-4 days to prepare for the start of the season. So I'm going to expect Chase to maybe start off just a little bit slower than he would be in our rest of season ranks. Now, of course, I'm operating under the assumption that Chase is playing here. The report that we got today was he was back at practice. Thank God. Jalen Waddle is actually my wide receiver 2 there in the Flock League. And I think Waddle, very easy start against Jacksonville. Miami does project out to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the league this week. Definitely monitor Waddle, though. He was dealing with injuries previously. And then Chris Olave going up against Carolina at 26. What's maybe a little bit tough about Olave here is the Carolina Panthers are obviously one of the worst offenses in the league. Right now, there's a decent spread on this game between New Orleans and Carolina. So you actually may have the New Orleans Saints be put into a position where they can slow the game down and just run the ball in the second half. And that potentially be a little bit concerning for the Olave upside. Now, jumping into our next tier, we're going to go Deebo Samuel at 27. Deebo is going to be much higher than this most weeks. He's going up against the Jets. The Jets have one of the best defenses in the league. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk is back week 1, but you are going to have no Sticky Ricky. So I think Deebo is going to be a safe play. You just lower your expectations compared to where they would be rest of season. Cooper Kupp will be a wide receiver that people have a lot higher than this. You look at other rankings lists, people are projecting out Kupp to be a top 10 receiver this week because it is a phenomenal matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. This should be the highest scoring game of the week. So if you get any opportunity to start a Los Angeles Ram, to start a Detroit Lion, you take advantage. Now, I just want to be a little bit patient while every single report coming out this offseason has just screamed Cooper Kupp is back. Cooper Kupp is healthy. This offense goes through Cooper Kupp. I would like to see it based off what happened last year. So we're going to put him at 28. Devontae Adams at 29 going up against the Chargers. This should be one of the lower scoring games this week. Right now, you actually only have an implied team total of about 18.5 points for the Raiders. Will be very interesting to see if Gardner Minshew can actually elevate this overall offense. Now, I will say Brock Bowers is going to go week 1. Kenneth Walker at 30 is going to be a very safe play this week. I actually moved him ahead of James Conner because if you look at the spread here between the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos, Seattle is a heavy favorite in this game. So you could very easily see them going through and running the ball a ton in the second half. And this should be a decently high scoring offense as well. Walker does project out to have the receiving role. So I think it's a great matchup against Denver. I mean, you can remember last year, Denver letting up 70 points to Miami. But James Conner will be my running back 1 in the Flock League. Really hoping that Conner comes through for us. Going up against Buffalo, it's going to be a tougher matchup where we're going to assume that the Buffalo Bills are leading this game the majority of the way. At least that's what Vegas sportsbooks are saying at the moment. It should be a high-scoring contest, however, and Trey Benson, from all reports, is really not going to have a role at the beginning of the season. Now, of course, James Conner would be lower than this in my rest of season rankings because rest of the year, we are expecting that Trey Benson continues to expand his role in Arizona. I'm just not really expecting that to be a factor week 1. Joe Mixon will be our next running back. If you are looking at Mixon, should be a very high scoring game going up against the Indianapolis Colts. To be honest with you, because the Houston Texans do project out to score about 26 points this week, I wouldn't fault you at all to put Joe Mixon ahead of James Conner, possibly put him ahead of Kenneth Walker as well. I am just going to be a little hesitant, as I think you can see with these rankings, when it comes to rookies and players changing offenses. When it comes to players changing offenses and rookies, I just want to get a little more clarity because I can sit here and I can be very confident with the projection, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it is just that, a projection. Now, T. Higgins will be our next player here at 33. So obviously Higgins is a big time riser in comparison to where these rankings were at the very beginning of the week. I'm sure if you've been looking at flockfantasy.com, just every single day, we move him a little bit higher. We move him a little bit higher. We move him a little bit higher because it took so long for Chase to actually get back with this team. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if Higgins has that expanded role week 1. Now, one of the concerns that you will have is they're going up against New England. New England right now projects out to only score about like 16.5, 17 points this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. And if that's going to be the case, it will just be a position where the Bengals really could just afford to run the ball in the second half. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. will be our next guy here at 34. I want to reiterate, Harrison is going to be way higher than this in my rest of season rankings. I know people were upset with us for disrespecting Harrison and putting him as our wide receiver 16 in our week 1 rankings in the previous video, but it can't hurt to just be a little bit patient with these rookies. Obviously, with Harrison here, putting him at 34 for your flex spot, more likely than not, you are starting him. I just know that a lot of people took him at the very beginning of round 2. Hell, in the Flock League, he went at pick 12. And if your expectations for him are he's going to hit the ground running and he's going to be immediately a mid-wide receiver 1, I'd probably scale them back just a little bit. Now, Rashee Rice at 35, going up against Baltimore tonight. Cannot wait for this game. Hollywood Brown is officially ruled out. So really, you just have Kelsey, Rice, and Xavier Worthy. Worthy stretching the field, presumably Kelsey and Rice actually drawing the targets underneath. And yeah, I mean, it's a tough matchup going up against Baltimore. Actually, if you look at the over-under of this game, sportsbooks aren't having it as high as you would naturally expect. Now, our next tier is going to be led off with Mike Evans. Mike Evans, very boring play, right? You just put him in your lineup every single week. Going up against Washington, right now you have an implied team total about 23.5 points for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jalen McMillan is going to be a wide receiver addition that maybe impacts Chris Godwin, depending on what the slot utilization looks like between those two receivers. But Evans is just a super safe projection. Devonta Smith will be our next guy at 37, which should be a very high-scoring game against the Green Bay Packers. And if you are ranking Smith, personally, I'm going to prefer to use him in spots where you actually have the opposing offense with some kind of threat that they are able to score against Philadelphia. I mean, especially with the change in offensive coordinator here, a lot of people are going to be looking for hopefully this to be a faster tempo, hopefully a more passing volume overall in Philly. And actually, Smith is my wide receiver 3 in the Flock League. Really hoping for a good week. Brandon Ayuk will be our next guy at 38. Ayuk's going to be a lot higher in these rankings most weeks. But with Ayuk, he missed a ton of time during training camp. And at the same time, it's just a very tough matchup going up against the Jets here. If you look at season-long projected win totals and projected implied team totals, sportsbooks at the moment are currently projecting out the Niners to be the best offense in the NFL. But this week, they do project out more so to be middle of the road just because how good this Jets defense is. Alvin Kamara will be our next guy at 39. If you are looking at Alvin Kamara going up against Carolina, if we knew that he had 100% of the red zone work, then at that point, I think you could rank him a lot higher than this because we know the reception volume will be there. The issue is it does seem, at least based off preseason usage, based off what we had last year, that you do have to be a little concerned about Taysom Hill vulturing some touchdowns here. So if you wanted to go over to Underdog and you wanted to take the Kamara rushing touchdown, I think you are getting a decent little boost on that. You're getting 1.1x. Would be nice if Taysom vultures and you end up getting the win anyway with the vulture protection. But DJ Moore will be the next guy at 40. DJ Moore should be in a very high scoring game going up against the Tennessee Titans. I'm actually very surprised with how sportsbooks are projecting out the Chicago Bears offense week 1. I actually asked people on Twitter if they thought I should go through and start Caleb Williams or Brock Purdy. And what most people came back to me with was a stat that number 1 overall draft picks at the quarterback position. I forgot how the sample is. Something they were like 0-11 in their NFL debut. But right now the Bears are favored over Tennessee. And at the same time, they're supposed to score a decent amount of points. Keenan dealing with the foot injury. Rome Odunze as a rookie. So I think DJ Moore is a very safe play. Michael Pittman Jr. will be our next wide receiver at 41. So Josh Downs missing practice. Does look like Downs most likely is going to be missing week 1. And if you have no Josh Downs and instead it's just Michael Pittman Jr. and Adonai Mitchell being that deep threat, AD Mitchell may actually help out Pittman by stretching NFL defenses. And if you look at over-unders at the moment, this should be one of the higher scoring games of the week. Now, of course, we expect Anthony Richardson to have a ton of rushing touchdown equity, and Anthony Richardson should rack up rushing yards. So that doesn't bode well for the receivers in this offense. But Pittman, I think he's a safe play, especially if you have no Downs. DK Metcalf at 42. Almost no shot that this turns into a shootout with Denver. If you are looking at DK Metcalf, this is a receiver that we kind of know what we have, right? I'm operating under the assumption that Tyler Lockett is going to be good to go this week. If Tyler Lockett does miss and all of a sudden it's just Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba, then you will see the rankings, which I'm going to update every single day on flogfantasy.com. You will see the rankings include Metcalf a lot higher. Stephon Diggs at 43. I know it seems crazy to have Nico Collins as high as we do and the other 2 Houston receivers this low. To be honest with you, I wasn't all in on Nico Collins like this previously. Early in the offseason, though, we actually had Danny from the Fantasy Stock Exchange come on flogfantasy.com. We talked about it in depth, and he sold me on Nico Collins. I still do prefer Stephon Diggs over Tank Dell. Most smart people are actually going in the opposite direction. Y'all know I'm the first person to admit I'm not smart. But I look at this saying, okay, well, in more 2 wide receiver sets, Stephon Diggs was out on the field rather than Tank Dell. We have the large sample of the Stephon Diggs dominance and really just the second half of last season's where you saw the fall. And I think it should be a fine matchup against Indy. Amari Cooper will be our next guy at 44. This is going to be a tougher matchup going up against Dallas, where right now the Cleveland Browns only have an implied team total about 22 points. And at the same time, should be a lower scoring game overall with how good this Cleveland Browns defense is. We'll be very interested to see the usage of Jerry Jeudy this week in Cleveland. Now, Malik Neighbors will be higher than this in my rest of season rankings. If you are looking at Neighbors, he is a rookie, but this should be a decent matchup going up against Minnesota. He should have a massive role from a target share perspective almost immediately. So I'm fine starting him this week against the Minnesota Vikings. Just if you took him like in the end of the second round, the beginning of the third round, which is where he was going in underdog drafts, I would probably be a little bit hesitant to expect that type of production. But I do know that a lot of y'all in just your regular ESPN, your Yahoo drafts, you're able to get like Neighbors in rounds 5, 6, 7. And if that's the case, honestly, I think you can start him in week 1 because it is a solid matchup. Zay Flowers going up against KC will be our next guy here. I think it's going to be a little bit of a lower scoring game, as we already mentioned. I know that that sounds crazy just because how good these offenses are, but the Chiefs have a great defense. You can make an argument that's how they won a Super Bowl last year, is having one of the best defenses in the league, plus Patrick Mahomes. So I'll be a little bit hesitant. Will be very interesting to see the target share when you have Mark Andrews fully healthy as well. Tank Dell will be our next guy at 47. If you look at Dell, I don't know. I mean, I think I could be way too low on him. If you look at the air yards that he had every single game last season, if you look at the fact that we typically want to be betting on rookie wide receivers that had good year 1s going into year 2, you can make a strong argument that Tank Dell is a better play than this. My thought process is with Dell, I don't know. He was an extremely old rookie at 24 years old. He is a smaller receiver than we've really ever seen have success in fantasy. He's the first guy to do it at this size. So I do want to be a little hesitant. It should be a high-scoring offense. Should be a decent game as well, though. And David Montgomery actually is a really good spot for week 1 in particular. The Rams' defensive line is banged up. With Montgomery, the Lions project out to be the highest-scoring offense in the league. They have the best offensive line in the league. And Jahmyr Gibbs was dealing with a hamstring coming into this week. So to be honest with you, Montgomery's going to be lower than this in these flex rankings most weeks going forward. But specifically for week 1, especially with Gibbs coming off the hamstring, I think that this is just a phenomenal spot for Montgomery. Terry McLaurin will be our next guy at 49. And Pickens here as well. I mean, both wide receivers are very similar. They're both playing in what should be low-scoring offenses. And both receivers are talented options that should see every single target in their respective offenses. Now, currently, I am kind of debating with Terry McLaurin in our flex spot or not. I would be interested to know what your thought process is for this week. But I don't know. Going up against Tampa, I would like to just see Jaden Daniels at least 1 week before we have to roll out McLaurin. And Jerome Ford will be our next guy. So Ford could be higher than this. I've been trying to find some official word on this, but we may not get it until tomorrow or the next day. So, of course, I'll update my rankings on the site. Initially, Deonta Foreman was cut from the Browns. I thought that just meant Ford was going to be set up to absolutely smash. A lot of people in the YouTube comment section got back to me and said, actually, the Cleveland Browns re-signed Deonta Foreman. I can't figure out if Foreman's going to be active for week 1 or not. If Foreman is inactive for week 1, which I'm expecting he's probably active, but if Foreman were to be inactive and it's really just Jerome Ford going out there, at that point, I think you could push Jerome Ford to the very top of this tier because it should be a decent offense where he has a receiving role and he should have every single touch in said backfield. Aaron Jones will be our next guy at 52. Aaron Jones, good matchup going up against the Giants. Very rarely will the Minnesota Vikings ever be favored this season with Sam Darnold under center, but going up against the Giants, this is one of those spots. So you could see the Minnesota Vikings looking to run the ball in the second half. DeAndre Swift will be our next back, and then Ramondre Stevenson. So this is the other decision that I have to make in my league. So I initially ranked Stevenson over Swift, thinking that, with Swift, he should be in a better offense, but he has to compete with both Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, whereas Ramondre Stevenson has a much lower implied team total, only at 16 points, but he only has to compete with Antonio Gibson. But I asked y'all in the comment section, I asked y'all on the live stream, I asked Twitter, I'm trying to get every opinion I can with this. And it does sound like overwhelmingly people are telling us to go with DeAndre Swift. Based off the implied team total, you actually have almost a 9-point gap between the points that the Bears should be scoring this week and the points that the Patriots should be scoring. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to go Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin, back-to-back here. Really boring plays here. I'll say that Calvin Ridley, you do have DeAndre Hopkins looking like he will be back and good to go week 1. Hopkins may start a little bit slower coming off the injury. It's just something we don't know yet. Chris Godwin, the main thing we're going to be looking at will be a slot utilization here in Tampa. If Godwin gets a bunch of snaps, a bunch of route runs, and a bunch of targets coming out of the slot, then I think Godwin may be a riser in these rankings next week. Raheem Mostert, Chuba Hubbard will be back-to-back. Obviously, Mostert doesn't really have the receiving role, and at the same time, with Raheem Mostert, you have to compete against Devon Achane. But he should be in just a much better offense than what you have with Chuba Hubbard, where right now the implied team total between these two offenses is about an 8.5-point difference, where the Carolina Panthers currently project out to be one of the lowest scoring offenses in the league. So I would be a little hesitant to just go out there and immediately play Chuba Hubbard just because you have no Jonathan Brooks. I definitely think that he is a viable play, but I want to be, a little hesitant. Jaden Reed will be our next wide receiver at 59. Going up against Philly should be a very high-scoring offense. And actually, one of my favorite pick'ems this week on Underdog will be Jaden Reed for higher than 3.5 receptions. I think taking Jaden Reed to have 4 more receptions in this game is honestly a decent pick'em spot. And then our next guy will be Christian Kirk. Kirk, we're going to have to monitor the injury with. Sounds like right now he won't have any limitations. And if Kirk is 100% good to go, I think you could move him ahead of Reed. And you could say the same thing with Keenan Allen here, where if you are looking at Keenan Allen right now dealing with the foot, but also at the same time, Rome Odunse's a rookie. I don't know if you expect a massive workload for Rome immediately. And with Keenan, obviously, he is a pro's pro. I mean, this isn't his first rodeo. And then our next guy will be Najee Harris at 62. So Najee Harris has been a faller. Does look like it's going to be a situation where you are splitting with Jalen Warren week 1. Initially, Jalen Warren was dealing with a hamstring. It looked like that he may miss time, but now he should be good. So Najee is going to be splitting the backfield with him and what projects out to be one of the lower scoring games and one of the lower scoring offenses this week. Zamir White will also be in a very low scoring offense. And the issue with Zamir White is not only will he be in said bad offense, but he also may not catch the ball. That's going to be the main thing that I want to see for Zamir is how many routes he is running in Las Vegas. And if he is actually getting any targets out of the backfield this week. Tony Pollard will be our next guy. With Pollard, it's very tough to project out the split that you are going to have with Tajee Spears. Should be a better offensive situation than what you have with Javonte as our next player, though. And I know we got some pushback with the Javonte ranking in our running backs video. People saying, oh, Mason, Javonte is just going to have a ton of targets out of the backfield trailing with Seattle. And the thing is, if you actually look at the usage that we had for these running backs in the preseason, it looks like Jaleel will actually be a running back that's out there in 2-minute drills and third down potentially. So the Javonte receiving volume may not be super easy to project. Now, of course, if Jaleel's not really an impact player and Javonte is just a 3-down workhorse week 1, Javonte will be ranked significantly higher than this in weeks coming forward. Xavier Worthy will be our next guy at 66. If you are looking at Xavier Worthy, you have no Hollywood Brown, so completely fine if you wanted to go through and just jam in Worthy against the Baltimore Ravens. But at the same time, he's a rookie wide receiver that potentially profiles to be more so a field stretching option. I think he's definitely behind both Kelsey and Rashee Rice in terms of the target pecking order, and it's a tougher matchup going up against Baltimore. Zach Moss will be our next guy at 67. So Cincinnati went out there and they listed Zach Moss as the starting running back on their depth chart. But at the same time, the coaching staff came out and said, our depth chart does not matter at all. I spend 0 times thinking about it. So overall, this is a coin flip of if it's going to be Zach Moss, if it's going to be Chase Brown. It's going to be a situation where they probably ride the hot hand. It's going to be a personnel package. I think I am leaning on Zach Moss initially. It should be a game going up against the New England Patriots where they definitely can just shut down and run it in the second half. Christian Watson will be our next guy at 68 with Watson. Looks to be healthy right now, of course, which is a big plus. It looks like this should be one of the higher scoring offenses as well. You are kind of banking on a big play. Deontay Johnson at 69 will be a receiver that people are higher on than I am. He was banged up during training camp. You've had to deal with injuries for a very long time with Deontay Johnson. You have Leggett. You have Adam Thielen here as well for week 1. Right now, the Carolina Panthers only project to score 18 points according to Vegas Sportsbooks. If you're playing in a full PPR format where maybe touchdown upside doesn't matter as much, you can push Deontay a little bit higher than this. But specifically in a league where touchdown upside matters, I mean, Deontay Johnson, you're getting a 2.07x multiplier for him to score a touchdown on Underdog right now. That is lower than a lot of these other receivers. Like for an example, Christian Watson's only at a 1.66x multiplier to score a touchdown. So yeah, I mean, if you think that Deontay has that upside, if you think that Bryce Young has that upside, I will create a little pick'em slip for you right here. I mean, I'm not necessarily going all in on it myself, but you could go Bryce Young more than 202 passing yards. Deontay Johnson gets a receiving touchdown, and Derek Carr at the same time has saved more than 231 passing yards. And that'd be $10 to win 124 just because it's so unlikely that Deontay Johnson actually scores a touchdown. Now, Courtland Sutton will be our next guy here. Sutton kind of in a similar spot, right? Should be a bad offense. I actually may need to move Sutton ahead of Deontay, though. Sutton's touchdown odds are definitely a lot higher than what you have with Deontay. And I think a big reason for this is, one, obviously Sutton has the size in the red zone role. But two, at the same time, in the case of Courtland Sutton, you don't really have a solidified wide receiver 2 in Denver. With Deontay, you have to worry about Leggett. You have to worry about Adam Thielen. With Sutton, you have to worry about Marvin Mims. So I think you can definitely go Sutton here. Jalen Warren will be our next back, as well as Chase Brown, as running backs that are most likely in a committee. In the case of Jalen Warren, I think it's very easy to say that he's a talented guy that will have a receiving role, but it's a much worse offense than what you have in Cincinnati with Chase Brown. But I will be live streaming every single night if I was unable to get to your question here. So just subscribe, come ask me your question in a live stream. And of course, if you wanted to take advantage of that Travis Kelce special pick on more than less than half a total yard for Thursday night, and a Christian McCaffrey special pick on more than less than half a total yard for Monday night, plus get that vulture protection on your pick'em slips this week. Find all of that on Underdog Fantasy. Use code FLOCK if you want to get both of those special pick'ems, and if you want a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And we have something coming very soon for code FLOCK users on Underdog. But thank you again. Really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and hope that I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.